So I've asked AI to give me some topics around nutrition and weight loss that are highly debated on the internet right now. And let's face it, most people, that is the number one issue that they're dealing with right now, is trying to get rid of some excess body fat that may have accumulated over the years. And I think we can all kind of agree that nutrition is a big part of this thing. So I think a lot of people are out there searching for answers. And when you search for answers and you look for experts, there's a lot of different camps out there. There's a lot of different ideas and thoughts. And sometimes they are completely opposed to each other. So how do we kind of navigate this whole thing? Well, I'm going to take a look at this from the lens of being in the trenches and working with hundreds, probably thousands of people doing all kinds of different things to see how to get someone into their healthiest, fittest, best looking body, right? That's ideally what I do in my program, Athletic After 40, and what I've been doing for decades. So without further ado, let's talk about number one. Number one is this debate between intermittent fasting versus traditional dieting. So which one of those things is more effective when it comes to weight loss? And let's define what weight loss really means. I think what most of us are looking for is a loss of body fat, okay? And now I think if we can agree upon that, let's define what it means to be on a traditional diet, because AI is not giving me much insight into what they mean by traditional dieting, and you might have a different idea than I do. So I think it's important to actually define this. And I would consider traditional dieting to be a calorie perspective kind of weight loss solution, right? So in other words, if I figure out what my basal metabolic rate is and I subtract 500 calories from that, and then I start eating in a calorie deficit every single day, and I get myself into a 3,500 calorie deficit, I should lose a pound of body weight, right? So let's look at traditional dieting from that lens, strictly calories in versus calories out. So does it work? 100%. If we restrict someone's calories enough, we know for a fact that they're going to lose some weight. Here's what we don't know with traditional dieting or calories in, calories out. We don't know where the weight is coming from. Is it muscle tissue? Is it organs? Is it bone density? Is it body fat? We don't know where that body weight is going away from. Or maybe it's a combination of all of those things, which I think is most likely. And I think if you look at a lot of the calorie restriction research that's out there, you'll see that when we restrict someone's calories enough, body weight disappears from all different areas of the body. Now, I would argue that it's probably not it's not the best way to go about weight loss, right? Obviously, you're going to get smaller, but I think the ideal thing, the holy grail, is figuring out a way to only lose weight from the fat cells, right? So these fat cells, they fill up like balloons. How can we tell just the fat cells to shrink and release their cargo, right? So how do we access that energy? Now, if we look at this from an evolutionary standpoint, we know that the reason that humans have fat cells is to store energy for times of famine, right? So if we don't have a lot of food around, well, good news is your body's got body fat. It can pull from that body fat and keep you alive for really long periods of time. It's pretty amazing. So there's a reason we have this fat storage system, this energy storage system. And that's where I think intermittent fasting becomes really interesting, because when you look at some of the research, you can see that if we fast someone long enough, okay, they can shift their physiology to burning more fat for energy. And we can actually measure that in the blood. So we can measure something called ketones, and you can get a ketone reader on Amazon for like $35. You can do a little pinprick on your finger and test what your ketone level is. If your ketone level is at a certain level, it means your body's burning a percentage of fat that it might not be burning when you're not fasting, when you're eating food. So that's super interesting, right? So we know that we can access more fat for energy when we're fasted. But then how long do you have to fast in order to get to those levels? Now, that's where I think the debate comes in, right? Some people are going to say, well, you have to fast for 36 hours. And is that a realistic thing to do for the rest of your life, is to fast for 36 hours every week or every month or even every quarter? The sustainability of it is certainly questionable, right? We know it works. We know you burn more fat, but is that sustainable? And I'm going to say not really, right? I know some people that have kind of played with this, myself included. I did it once. It was so awful that I never want to do it again. I felt terrible during that 72 hours, during that 3 days. So I never want to go there again. And I don't want to recommend it to others. So what might be a better way to do this? Well, what if we shrink that time duration down? What if we did something called a 16-8? A 16-8 is what we call time-restricted eating. And if you look at a 24-hour window, a 24-hour day, we want to restrict your eating window to 8 hours and spend 16 hours not eating. Now, does that mean if you do that consistently day after day after day, does that mean that you're gonna burn more fat for energy? Maybe. I don't think we know for sure if that's the best way to do it. Okay, but I think there's something there. I think there's something to it. And I know a lot of people that follow that 16-8 kind of protocol that have seen some weight loss results. Now, where I think it works best, at least in my experience, is if you're also exercising, but here's the even more important, you're doing some form of resistance training. You have to lift weights, because what happens when you lift weights in a fasted state, even if the fast is not that long, is it sends signals to your body to say, hey, muscles, we need you. Don't pull from muscles to access energy when you're fasted. Pull from the fat. Right? Pull from the fat. Now, you'll never get in ketosis doing 16-8. I don't know anybody that's ever done it, but there might be something there. You might be able to access more fat rather than just burning carbohydrates all the time. So I think it's viable. And then the other cool thing about a 16-8 protocol is that it's very sustainable. I know so many people, myself included, who have been doing this for years and years and years, and maybe not super strict 16-8, but a lot of people who don't eat breakfast, or a lot of people who don't eat late at night, right? There's different ways to kind of approach this thing. And I think just overall as a society, we've sort of been trained, especially if you're over 40, we've been trained to, you have to eat breakfast, you have to eat lunch, you have to eat dinner. And if you remember way back in the day, Body for Life, I don't know if you remember that, Bill Phillips, he was the founder of EAS. He had one of the most successful weight loss programs out there, but he would say, you have to eat 5 meals a day. Like that's where that generally started from. And really, I shouldn't say it was the most successful weight loss program, because what it really did is it was geared towards bodybuilders. So he sold a lot of supplements. Anyways, we won't even go down that road, but we've been trained to eat more, And I think we've kind of obviously gone over the edge there. Plus the foods, the quality has gotten so crappy. So look, intermittent fasting, I think if you get the right protocol, can be fully sustainable. And I do think there is some benefit there when it comes to not just losing body fat, but also sustaining it. And again, with that being said, you have to lift some heavy things. So get in the gym, lift some heavy stuff. It's so important, right? All of this stuff, no diet, no intermittent fasting protocol, none of these things works as well as when you are also exercising and also sleeping good at night. If you can pull all three together, really that's where the magic happens. Okay, so intermittent fasting, I think that's the better way to do it, only because I do think that there is going to be some level of body fat loss as opposed to, losing everything. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So we've got the role of exercise in weight loss. Now, most people, at least back in the day, and even when I went to college, I was kind of taught this. I went to college back in the 90s for exercise science, and we didn't get taught anything nutrition related, which is sort of interesting, because when I got out into the real world and I started working with clients, most clients wanted to lose weight, even back then. So what I thought was the right thing to do, because I was taught this in college, is to get them to burn more calories, is to get them to exercise. And I was of this impression that if I just got people to exercise enough, mostly cardio, that they would lose weight. But here's the deal. I would get people doing all kinds of cardio and they wouldn't lose weight. In fact, there's a lot of people I know that are in incredible shape, cardiovascular shape, and are overweight. And I challenge you to go to the local 5K race in your town, because most towns have some sort of a local 5K race, and stand at the finish line and watch the people that are crossing the finish line. Watch the top 25 people. You're going to find that probably 50%, maybe even more, are overweight. And if you interview them, the big thing here is they're not eating good foods, right? Their nutrition is kind of a mess. And most people will easily admit it. They're the ones that are going and grabbing a couple of beers after the run, right? No judgment, totally fine. But I think we can kind of put this one to rest. Exercise does not equal weight loss. It can in some circumstances, but the most important thing is that you get your nutrition figured out and you're sleeping good at night. So when I look at exercise, I think it's a terrible tool for weight loss. And in fact, I never think of exercise as a weight loss tool. I think of exercise as the best tool for getting people fit. Shocker, I know. Exercise actually makes people fit, right? And what does fit mean? We want to make people stronger, we want to make them more powerful, and we want to improve their endurance. If we can do all three of those things, that is a fitter person, right? We want to push those limits, and sky's the limit. You can take that as far as you want. But look, if you want to lose weight, you got to get your nutrition figured out, okay? All right, so let's talk about number 3, low calorie keto diets versus high carb, low fat diets. Now, I think let's simplify this and let's pin this down just a little bit more. Let's call it keto diets. Let's call it low carb versus low fat. How about that? Low carb versus low fat. Now, we know growing up, again, I'm 49, so I grew up in the decades of fat is bad, fat's going to give you a heart attack. And I think nowadays we know, or at least we have a good idea, science has given us enough clues that that might not be the case. I think fat is perfectly healthy for people. In fact, I eat a ton of fat, and obviously I'm not fat, and my health markers are very, very good. So I don't think fat is a problem. What about low carb? I think for some people, low carb is going to be a much better option. I believe, and again, this is based on experience, that we need fat to be healthy, but we do not need carbohydrates, especially in excess, to live a healthy life. Now, let me say that again because I think it's really important. I think we need fat to live a healthy life, and both saturated and unsaturated. We need both of those things to live at our healthiest levels. We do not need a lot of carbohydrates to be healthy. In fact, some would even say that we don't need any, which I, again, fully believe. But if we want to optimize health, I think carbohydrates are important. So I would say, in my experience, it's going to be a much more healthful way to approach your life if you're leaning more into the low carb area of this whole thing. Whenever I hear someone say low fat, I kind of cringe a little bit. I think there are some folks out there, especially the people who don't exercise very often, who might be able to find some success with it. Think of like vegetarians. A lot of vegetarians are very, very low fat, but I also find that a lot of vegetarians eat a ton of processed refined crap, and they're very overweight, and a lot of them are type 2 diabetic. So there's a right way and a wrong way to do all this stuff, but I do think that eating carbohydrates is good. I think keeping it relatively low is also really important. And I think leaning into fat is excellent. And again, I'm a living example of eating a very, very high fat diet and not being overweight. So I've been running around 10% body fat-ish, right in that range it's probably been 20 years. So, I mean, it works incredibly well. And I eat primarily real food. If I give anybody any recommendation, anybody that works with me, the number one thing that we work on is the quality of the food more than the quantity. I don't really care about quantity, at least initially. The most important thing is the quality. Eat from these categories: meat, veggies, nuts, seeds, and fruit. Meat, veggies, nuts, seeds, and fruit. And when you hear that, you'll notice that it's not necessarily no carb, because I think carbohydrates are important, especially if you're a very active individual, especially if you value your fitness, which you should, because I think it's a big component of your health. If you value your fitness, you need some carbohydrates. But if you listen to that prescription, meat, veggie, nuts, seeds, and fruit is where you get your carbohydrates from. And it's pretty tough to overeat fruit. And look, if you're super active, if you're doing some strength training, if you're doing some aerobic stuff, if you're really consciously trying to improve the performance of your body, you need those carbohydrates because you expend those things for energy, when you're doing your stuff. So that's what I think. I think we need to lean more on the low carb side. I think fat is great. I think a lot of us don't get enough of it, to be quite honest, especially if you're over 40, because we've been trained, dare I say, brainwashed to think that fat is bad. But if you really want to dig into it, go check out where that all started from, because there's some documentation of how that whole thing started. And if you're into conspiracy theories, it's really fascinating and really interesting. But anyways, I'll leave you with that. Those are the 3 things for today. And look, I hope this finds you well. I hope you can take some of these strategies and utilize them in your own life so that you can live the healthiest, highest performance life that you possibly can. Take care of yourself out there. And if you have any topics that you'd like me to cover, let me know in the comments and I will cover those.